three brilliant legal minds joining me now. Allison Leota, former federal sex crimes prosecutor, attorney, and legal analyst Monique Pressley, who represented Bill Cosby, and criminal defense attorney Mark Petrovich, who represented D.C. sniper John Boyd Malvo. We've got so much to talk about. I want to get right to a question that's on a lot of people's minds. We are hearing so much information about the violence and the allegations of domestic abuse. In fact, the counsel for Diddy has already owned this in the opening statement, saying, yep, he has done these things. He is a domestic abuser. But they said this is not the crime he is charged with. I wonder, from your perspective, Allison, is the testimony focusing too much on the violence, or is it enough to prove the elements of what he is charged with?
Yeah, great question, Laura. I think that the testimony that's going on right now is an introduction. We've been in trial 1 week. They say it's going to be 8 to 10 weeks. But they're painting a picture of the violence that has come, that just the way that Sean Diddy Combs lived his life. He's not just beating up his girlfriend, the girl he loves. He's beating up her friends. He's beating up singers he's threatening singers that he is working with. It is his kingdom. Everyone else just lives in it. And I think that sets it up for those RICO violations, for the idea that he is running basically a hip-hop mafia.
Tell me, Monique, when you look at that and think about the enterprise, which has to be part of the RICO, a very serious, carries life in prison if he is convicted of this. When you hear that and you look at things like Carrie Morgan, who is the former best friend who got this payment and this NDA, they're going to use that in part, I would assume, to suggest that this is all part of the machinations of trying to control and make sure that sex acts and beyond can still be done. Do you see those NDAs or those payments as problematic for the defense or helping?
Neither. I think that actually the other episodes of violence with people with whom he was not involved sexually or romantically work against the prosecution, because it makes for an air of violence. It makes for kind of a mood swing, emotional type person who is not in control of impulses, and that's not the same thing as the mastermind who is doing things for a specific purpose, and the specific purpose is the sex trafficking of one person. That's not what comes off. And for the same reason, I do think that it's a shame that you have to say it in a trial, but I do think we're heavy on domestic violence that's uncharged at this point. And from everything that people says about the jurors, they're not leaning into it. And I think that's because they credited Miss Ventura in the first place. So unless they understand why we're hearing the more and why we're hearing the more when we already believe her, we saw the video with our own eyes. She was a credible witness, and now the witnesses that are coming behind her aren't as credible as she was. And that makes for a different type problem. So I'm interested to see what comes next.
A fascinating point, particularly because you've got this sweet spot, right, Mark, where on the one hand, you want to give enough to connect the dots later, obviously probably the end of trial. It's not chronological. On the other hand, you've got testimony coming in from people like Morgan, the former best friend, who suggested that Cassie Ventura downplayed some of the violence to at least her. When you've got essentially a corroborating witness who's coming in, the prosecution wants to call, then you've got her testimony suggesting that Ventura did not speak to her about it in the same way, perhaps, as she has described now. How does that play?
I think there are a couple of things that came out with regard to that testimony. I think the defense did a good job pulling apart some points. First of all, she testified and said she didn't want to be testifying. She said, I wanted to move on from these people.
Yeah.
Both, not just Combs, but these people.
And their problems, she said.
And their problems. And then that's consistent with another statement she made, which was with regard to what happened after the incident that she accused Combs of assaulting her. She ended the friendship with Ms. Ventura based on the fact that Ms. Ventura didn't back her up. And again, there's a cohesion between Combs and Ventura. And that's what the defense wants to establish, a true cohesion between those two people. She also brought out a number of other points. For instance, she pointed out that the victim was jealous of a couple other women who Mr. Combs was seeing at those times. And she also testified and said that they loved each other. These are things that are common emotions in a common relationship. They point to this being more of a normal relationship than the way the prosecution is trying to paint it out. And I think there were a number of things that the defense brought out to help them along those lines.
I don't know if normal is the word I would describe with what we've heard so far, but I get your point about the idea of the text messages coming in to describe that there was different ranges of emotions inscribed here. Really quick, though, we're going to talk more about all of this. But we've just now heard from an actual employee, a former employee of Sean Diddy Combs. Up till now, we've been hearing about the enterprise, about people in this inner circle, bodyguards, high-level employees, former assistants. What's the impact of now finally hearing from someone and who actually says that he believes that Cassie couldn't get away?
Yeah. So I write novels now. I write crime novels, romantic suspense.
You write great novels, by the way.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. This was, in her mind, I'm sure, the beginning of a great romance. It's the story that everyone is hoping for, to get swept off her feet by this, white knight on a shining horse. And then it turned out that he was fighting demons of his own, and he kind of drags her into it. You're like with her, this character, for a moment, and then suddenly you see the world that's all around her. And I think we're about to see this world that he has created, and it feels like it's going to feel like a prison. He has everyone there is reporting to him. Everyone's job there is to make him happy, to fulfill his sexual desires, to make him seem like a big man. And she's an important piece in that, but she is living in this gilded cage, and we're about to see all of the keepers of that cage.
Monique, I know you and I have talked about this in the past. We're going to get more about this and the idea of how the prosecution is going to try to connect the dots to build that, and the defense is going to tear that down. We have a lot more to talk about, so everyone stand by. My panel is back with me. I want to digest a little bit of what we heard. First of all, one of the things that struck me is the idea of these inconsistencies and fitting into the general theme of a prosecutor's case. But the details do matter. And if you're a defense counsel, you're going to try to chip away at every little thing you can, right?
Yes. And the fact that a witness's testimony evolves is not what's supposed to happen. Either your memory needs to be refreshed by something because your memory naturally deteriorates over time, or your memory is improved and refreshed due to something that is said to you or shown to you. And if you meet with the prosecutors 8 separate times, you're going to have some discrete memories that maybe you didn't have before you met with them. And that doesn't necessarily reflect poorly on the witness. The jury will see it that way. But to me, that reflects poorly on the prosecution, because what you're supposed to do with a witness, when you have a witness, is provide them an opportunity to give their best recollection. You're not supposed to be informing upon the recollection with things that aren't going to come into court. And so, to me, they set up their own witness to look bad here, and they set up a situation where the jury may be like, were the eggs thrown? Was it a skillet? And all of that, frankly, is unnecessary. Something happened in that kitchen with the skillet. It doesn't matter if the eggs were thrown, doesn't matter if the skillet was thrown. We have this man on video kicking, hitting, punching Ms. Ventura. The jury understands that. So when you muddy the waters with witnesses that have their own purposes, I just think you're messing up your own case.
How do you see it?
I think the evolution of the witness's memory is one point that the defense can point to among other points with regard to this particular witness. It was mentioned that we discussed a money grab. Well, she, as recently as 2020, reached out after all this, after all her observations and everything she witnessed. She reached out to him as recently as 2020 to try to get together and work with him again. Well, that cuts against her whole story. Why would you want to reach out and work with somebody like that? Why would you possibly want to reach out and work with somebody who's involved in a criminal enterprise that involves sex trafficking, drug use, arson, and all the rest of the allegations? It doesn't.
Well,
make any sense.
just to clear, I believe she testifies that she's reaching out on behalf of a friend, and part of what this is.
But that's just as bad.
Well, I hear you on that, and the jury will have to decide. Part of that does and could speak to the pure gatekeeping function and the power of this is the only entry point in her mind. That's part of the prosecution's case, right? That he is so powerful that he is removing the willpower of somebody to be able to leave because the only option and avenue for livelihood is through him. He makes a good point in the sense of, well, does that undermine your belief that he truly is that bad person?
So you guys saw discrepancies, but I saw actually a lot of similarities between the witnesses' testimony. When Dawn Richard was talking about that frying pan, she was saying how he kind of brought it toward her head, and then Cassie kind of ducked and fell to the floor, and maybe it kind of hit her head, but maybe it didn't because she was able to escape that blow by curling on the fetal position on the kitchen floor. And that struck me as the same thing that she did in the elevator bank as well. When he went to hit her, she falls down, she curls into the fetal position. And the same thing that Carrie Morgan testified to in Jamaica. He hits her, she falls down, she hits her head on the brick, she curls into a fetal position. And this is something, you and I, Laura, we worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. I handled a lot of cases of domestic violence. And one thing that I would see over and over is that people who are hit over and over would come up with a defense for it. And it was kind of an instinctual thing that you would do every time. And this is what Cassie Ventura is doing, according to herself and according to 3 other witnesses who testified today, showing her curling into that fetal position to escape his blows.
That's an important, thematically about the violence of force or coercion. There's a sex trafficking aspect of it. They have to prove that, though, force or coercion or threats in order to get that link, and that's the predicate for the RICO. But then you had Carrie Morgan, who you mentioned. She testified that she told Combs's chief of staff, again, part of the inner circle they're articulating is maybe part of the enterprise, allegedly, Christina Karam, that police were actually notified about that 2016 hotel incident you're actually speaking about, where he is seen on camera assaulting her. How important then will Karam's role be in trying to establish this inner circle enterprise?
Well, I think that it depends on what people knew and when, right? It's not an enterprise if nobody has any idea what the actual activity is, and what they're doing is just following the boss's orders generally. Because
the end game is important.
Yes, it's a question of an employee following orders, whether it's we need 1,000 bottles of baby oil, or whether it's we need this person on a plane. If you have no idea about any illegality that is happening after the person gets off the plane, or the reasoning or the machinations behind the baby oil, then you're just doing your job. And I think that no matter how many times we get corroboration for violence that the jury, as I said, already accepts, what we end up getting from these witnesses is not just the one time in 2020 where Ms. Richard wants to work again. She said on the stand that she regretted that the arrangement, the business arrangement, ended, that she feels like it was an end for her career, that she tried multiple times after that to work with this so-called monster again. And so I think seeing violence, not saying anything, is one thing. That sounds like fear. But then wanting to come back in, that's not fear, that's greed. That's desire to take care of yourself. And that is also a recurring theme that we're hearing from multiple witnesses.
Really quick, Mark, should the next government witness be focused on the enterprise building or the violence?
I think the next government witness should be focused on the enterprise building. I think that's an important aspect of this, and that hasn't been built up as much as it should be yet. I know it's a big case and it's a long case, but at some point the jury's got to hear that. Otherwise, they're going to get trained in a direction that's not helpful to their case.
Really important. Thank you so much, everyone. Really good discussion.